This is chapter 11 of volume 2 of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, or chapter 34 if your book is not divided into volumes. So, when they were gone, Elizabeth, as intending to exasperate herself as much as possible against Mr. Darcy, chose for her employment the examination of all the letters which Jane had written to her since her being in Kent. They contained no actual complaint, nor was there any revival of past occurrences or any communication of present suffering, but in all, and in almost every line of each, there was a want of that cheerfulness which had been used to characterize her style, and which, proceeding from the serenity of a mind at ease with itself, and kindly disposed toward everyone, had been scarcely ever clouded. So, we know that Elizabeth is at the Collins residence by herself because she has a headache, because she was crying her eyes out. Elizabeth noticed every sentence conveying the idea of uneasiness with an attention which it had hardly received on the first perusal. Mr. Darcy's shameful boast of what misery he had been able to inflict gave her a keener sense of her sister's sufferings. Whoa, she's upset, right? It was some consolation to think that his visit to Rosings was to end on the day after the next, and a still greater that in less than a fortnight she should herself be with Jane again, and enabled to contribute to the recovery of her spirits by all that affection could do. So Elizabeth is so mad, and she's so hurt, I guess, for her sister, and she's really upset with Mr. Darcy because he's the one who, I guess, schemed to separate Jane and Bingley, and she's rereading the letters that her sister sent, and she's basically, noticing that they are not cheerful the way that she would have written letters in the past, or that way she did write letters in the past. And so she's noticing that, Jane is not well and she is suffering. She could not think of Darcy's leaving Kent without remembering that his cousin was to go with him, but Colonel Fitzwilliam had made it clear that he had no intentions at all, and agreeable as he was, she did not mean to be unhappy about him. She was like, Mr. Darcy's leaving, good. But what stinks about that is that Colonel Fitzwilliam is leaving too. She's like, but it doesn't matter. It's not like he wants to hang out with me anymore, or if he's even serious about me at all, because, remember what he said in the previous chapter, that, she's basically poor, and he can't marry anyone poorer, right? So she's like, whatever, my feelings aren't hurt about that. While settling this point, she was suddenly roused by the sound of the doorbell. Somebody's there. And her spirits were a little fluttered by the idea of its being Colonel Fitzwilliam himself, who had once before called late in the evening, and might now come to inquire particularly after her. Well, remember, she is feeling sick, she has that headache, and maybe Mr. Collins told everybody at Rosings that Elizabeth wasn't feeling well. So maybe Colonel Fitzwilliam is there to check on her. But this idea was soon banished, and her spirits were very differently affected when, to her utter amazement, she saw Mr. Darcy walk into the room. In a hurried manner, he immediately began an inquiry after her health, imputing his visit to a wish of hearing that she were better. So it was Mr. Darcy who went to the Collins residence to see how Elizabeth was feeling, right? Because remember, she's feeling a little sick, or she has a headache. She answered him with cold civility. She's like, dude, I don't care if you're coming to check on me. You're meeting my sister, right? So she answered him with cold civility. He sat down for a few moments, and then, getting up, walked about the room. Elizabeth was surprised, but said not a word. After a silence of several minutes, he came towards her in an agitated manner, and thus began. Came towards her in an agitated manner, like he's being scary. And he says, and thus he began. So let's see, what is he going to say? In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. What? Wait a minute. He went towards her in an agitated manner and told her that he loves her? So he's like, I'm going to tell you, I love you. I'm like, what? I mean, maybe I'm imagining it wrong, but he was agitated about that. Elizabeth's astonishment was beyond expression. She stared, colored, doubted, and was silent. This he considered sufficient encouragement, and the avowal of all that he felt and had long felt for her immediately followed. So she couldn't say anything. She was just like, what in the world? And because she was silent, he thought that, he's like, oh, great, now I can continue with what I'm going to say. I mean, who is he? Mr. Collins, remember, who got encouragement from weird things that Elizabeth said, you know? And then he's like, oh, you must be teasing me and mean to accept my proposal. I wonder if Mr. Darcy has the same like delusions because, you know, Elizabeth didn't say anything and he's like, oh, this is encouragement enough to continue. He spoke well, but there were feelings besides those of the heart to be detailed. So he's not only talking about how he feels and how he loves her, there are other things. And he was not more eloquent on the subject of tenderness than of pride. So he was eloquent on the subject of tenderness and pride, or more on pride? How can you be eloquent on the subject of pride? And what does pride have to do with any of this? His sense of her inferiority, of its being a degradation, of the family obstacles which judgment had always opposed to inclination, were dwelt on with a warmth which he seemed due to the consequence he was wounding, but was very unlikely to recommend his suit. So he tells her, like, I love you, and I just can't hold my feelings back anymore. But he also throws in there that he understands she's inferior. Basically, she's not good enough for him. And he's struggling with that. I mean, is that what... I mean, imagine if somebody went to you and said those things, I love you, but all these things, and like feeling sorry for himself. I mean, you know, because he fell in love with a woman who was beneath his status. I mean, anyway, in spite of her deeply rooted dislike, she could not be insensible to the compliment of such a man's affection. So she's like, oh my gosh, like, I really don't like this guy, but it's kind of flattering that he is asking me anyway. And though her intentions did not vary for an instant, she was at first sorry for the pain he was to receive. She's like, oh, dude, this guy, I mean, that's so cool. Or that's nice that he's, flattering me in this way. But I mean, I feel kind of bad. I'm going to have to hurt him right now because she's probably going to say no. Till, roused to resentment by his subsequent language, she lost all compassion and anger. So at first she felt kind of sorry for him because she was going to tell him no, or, deny his love or not accept it. But then she started getting angry afterwards because of what he was saying about her being inferior and stuff like that. She tried, however, to compose herself to answer him with patience when he should have done. He concluded with representing to her the strength of that attachment which, in spite of all his endeavors, he had found impossible to conquer. So he's like, man, I'm just so attached to you. I'm so in love with you. And I've really, really tried. I've really tried not to feel this way, but I can't conquer that. And with expressing his hope that it would now be rewarded by her acceptance of his hand, he's asking her to get married. As he said this, she could easily see that he had no doubt of a favorable answer. He really thought she was going to say yes. He spoke of apprehension and anxiety, but his countenance expressed real security. Such a circumstance could only exasperate farther, and when he ceased, the color rose into her cheeks, and she said, oh my goodness, what is her response going to be to all this craziness? In such cases as this, it is, I believe, the established mode to express a sense of obligation for the sentiments avowed, however unequally they may be returned. It is natural that obligation should be felt, and if I could feel gratitude, I would now thank you. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly. I am sorry to have occasioned pain to anyone. It has been most unconsciously done, however, and I hope will be of short duration. The feelings which you tell me have long prevented the acknowledgement of your regard, can have little difficulty in overcoming it after this explanation. She's like, so, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to hurt your feelings. And, all those things that you said that gave you trouble, and that you, for liking me, that you just had a hard time getting over those things, like her inferiority. She's like, I'm sure those things that you mentioned will help you get over me, right? Mr. Darcy, who was leaning against the mantelpiece with his eyes fixed on her face, seemed to catch her words with no less resentment than surprise. His complexion became pale with anger, and the disturbance of his mind was visible in every feature. So now he's angry? He was struggling for the appearance of composure and would not open his lips till he believed himself to have attained it. So he's so angry he had to calm himself down before he spoke? What kind of proposal is this? The pause was to Elizabeth's feelings dreadful. At length, in a voice of forced calmness, he said, "And this is all the reply which I am to have the honor of expecting? I might perhaps wish to be informed why, with so little endeavor at civility, I am thus rejected, but it is of small importance." He's like, so this is your answer? Why aren't you being civil with me? Why are you being rude? Are you kidding me, Mr. Darcy? He really must not understand these things. I mean, I know he's rich and he has high ranking in the country or whatever, but for him not to get it, that he was being rude and this is not the ideal proposal? What do you mean she was being rude? You were rude first. "I might as well inquire," replied she, "why, with so evident design of offending and insulting me, you chose to tell me that you liked me against your will, against your reason, and even against your character." She's like, why would you tell me that? Was not this some excuse for incivility if I was uncivil? But I have other provocations, I have. Had not my own feelings decided against you, had they been indifferent, or had they even been favorable, do you think that any consideration would tempt me to accept the man who has been the means of ruining, perhaps forever, the happiness of a most beloved sister? She's like, dude, even if I did like you, there's no way I could ever be with you because of what you did to my sister. And Bingley, no, sorry. As she pronounced these words, Mr. Darcy changed color, but the emotion was short, and he listened without attempting to interrupt her while she continued. "I have every reason in the world to think ill of you. No motive can excuse the unjust and ungenerous part you acted there. You cannot deny that you have been the principal, if not the only means, of dividing them from each other, of exposing one to the censure of the world for caprice and instability, the other to its derision for disappointed hopes, and involving them both in misery of the acutest kind." She's like, you're the one who did it to them. They feel terrible because of you, or at least Jane does. Why would you do that, you big jerkwad, right? She paused and saw with no slight indignation that he was listening with an air which proved him wholly unmoved by any feeling of remorse. So he doesn't even feel sorry for it. He even looked at her with a smile of affected incredulity. "Oh! Can you deny that you have done it?" she repeated. With assumed tranquility, he then replied, "I have no wish of denying that I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister, or that I rejoice in my success. Toward him, I have been kinder than toward myself." So he's saying, yeah, I helped him. I separated them. I was nicer to him than I am to myself, because look at me, trying to marry into the family that I didn't think was good enough for my friend. Elizabeth disdained the appearance of noticing this civil reflection, but its meaning did not escape, nor was it likely to conciliate her. "But it is not merely this affair," she continued, "on which my dislike is founded. Long before it had taken place, my opinion of you was decided. Your character was unfolded in the recital which I received many months ago from Mr. Wickham. On this subject, what can you have to say? In what imaginary act of friendship can you here defend yourself? Or under what misrepresentation can you here impose upon others?" She's like, and yeah, what about Mr. Wickham? What about what you did to him? Only a jerkwad would do that to a friend. What do you have to say for yourself, Mr. Darcy? "You take an eager interest in that gentleman's concern," said Darcy in a less tranquil tone and with a heightened color. "Who that knows what his misfortunes have been can help feeling an interest in him?" "His misfortunes?" repeated Darcy contemptuously. "Yes, his misfortunes have been great indeed, and of your infliction. cried Elizabeth with energy. "You have reduced him to his present state of poverty, comparative poverty. You have withheld the advantages which you must know to have been designed for him. You have deprived the best years of his life of that independence which was no less his due than his desert. You have done all this, and yet you can treat the mention of his misfortunes with contempt and ridicule." She's like, "It's you. You're the one who didn't let him have the job that he was supposed to get from your dad." Right? "And this," cried Darcy, as he walked with quick steps across the room, "is your opinion of me. This is the estimation in which you hold me. I thank you for explaining it so fully. My faults, according to this calculation, are heavy indeed, but perhaps," added he, stopping in his walk and turning towards her, "these offences might have been overlooked had not your pride been hurt by my honest confession of the scruples that had long prevented my forming any serious design." He's like, maybe you could overlook this stuff if you didn't have so much pride, you know? And she's like, "These bitter accusations might have been suppressed had I, with greater policy, concealed my struggles and flattered you into the belief of my being impelled by unqualified, unalloyed inclination, by reason, by reflection, by everything." He's like, "So should I have told you something else? Should I not have been honest with you about how I felt? You know, I mean, these are my feelings, Elizabeth. I do feel that you are inferior to me. Do you want me to lie to you and be like, oh, everything's fine and dandy?" Says, "But disguise of every sort is my abhorrence." He's like, "No, I'm not going to lie to you. Nor am I ashamed of the feelings I related." He's like, "I'm not ashamed of how I felt. Like, that's just the way it is. They were natural and just. Could you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your connections? To congratulate myself on the hope of relations whose condition in life is so decidedly beneath my own?" He's like, "You think I'm going to be happy about that because you're so lowly? No." Dude, that's even worse, I think. So Darcy is just laying it out there. He's just super honest about how he feels. And I mean, I guess I can appreciate that, but it's just like, really? Like right now at a proposal, you're going to tell me all that? Can't you just tell me that stuff later? You know, after you know that I'm going to say yes. I mean, so no. I mean, she said no straight up, right? Anyway, Elizabeth felt herself growing more angry every moment, yet she tried to the utmost to speak with composure when she said, "You are mistaken, Mr. Darcy, if you suppose that the mode of your declaration affected me in any other way than as it spared me the concern which I might have felt in refusing you, had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner." She's like, "You know what? At first I was worried about offending you, but you're not even acting like a gentleman right now, so I really don't care if your feelings are hurt." She saw him start at this, but he said nothing, and she continued, "You could not have made me the offer of your hand in any possible way that would have tempted me to accept it." Again, his astonishment was obvious, and he looked at her with an expression of mingled incredulity and mortification. She went on, "From the very beginning, from the first moment, I may almost say, of my acquaintance with you, your manners impressing me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain of the feelings of others, were such as to form that groundwork of disapprobation on which succeeding events have built so immovable a dislike." She was like, "No. Since the beginning, when I first met you, you were just so mean and you didn't care about anybody. You were so rude. No, I just straight up didn't like you from the beginning. And I had not known you a month before I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry." "You have said quite enough, madam. I perfectly comprehend your feelings and have now only to be ashamed of what my own have been." He's ashamed for his feelings, remember, because she's inadequate. I guess. Is it inadequate? Where she's beneath him? Anyway, "Forgive me for having taken up so much of your time, and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness." And with these words, he hastily left the room, and Elizabeth heard him the next moment open the front door and quit the house. He's gone. What the heck was that? The tumult of her mind was now painfully great. She knew not how to support herself, and from actual weakness sat down and cried for half an hour. Her astonishment, as she reflected on what had passed, was increased by every review of it. That she should receive an offer of marriage from Mr. Darcy? That he should have been in love with her for so many months, so much in love as to wish to marry her, in spite of all the objections which had made him prevent his friends marrying her sister, and which must appear at least with equal force in his own case was almost incredible. So he really must like her, you know? I mean, if all those things matter to him, you know, having a wife with good connections and money, well, I don't even know if money's a big deal to him, but you know what I'm saying? And for him to just put those things aside and be with her and want to be with her and ask her to get married, maybe he really, really does like her because he is proud, right? It was gratifying to have inspired unconsciously so strong an affection, but his pride, his abominable pride, his shameless avowal of what he had done with respect to Jane, his unpardonable assurance in acknowledging, though he could not justify it, and the unfeeling manner in which he had mentioned Mr. Wickham, his cruelty towards whom he had not attempted to deny, soon overcame the pity which the consideration of his attachment had for a moment excited. So for a minute there, she's just like, oh gosh, I feel kind of bad about it. She's like, but no, he was mean to people. She continued in very agitating reflections till the sound of Lady Catherine's carriage made her feel how unequal she was to encounter Charlotte's observation, and hurried away to her room. The end of that chapter.